Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. So with the new Minecraft movie coming out and the new Minecraft update also recently being released, I've been really itching to create something Minecraft related. So I've had this idea in my brain for like the past few years to create these like cargo pants that were like a Minecraft grass block, and I've never really found the right time to do it, but now is the time. Now, onto the design of the pants. I essentially want them to be like your standard cargo pants, but looking like the Minecraft grass block texture, if that makes sense. So I want the waistband to sort of have a trim that is like the green grass part of the grass block texture. And I wanted to sort of play with that as well on the pockets. And so all the little pockets would also be little grass blocks around the pants. And I'm also now obsessed with digital embroidery because I got a new embroidery machine. So I'm gonna be putting stuff like that, little motifs all over the pants. On the back pocket, I want to put a little poppy and a little shovel. And because it's dirt, that's what you use to mine the dirt, duh. So I also want to put I thought like a nice little embroidery of the health bar would be cute because I love pixelated hearts. I just thought it would be a cute touch, especially if there's the poppy on the back. I thought like the red would be a nice cute little contrast to the green. And I also want to put, I don't know, I thought like a sword and a pickaxe would be cool because those are like my main tools that I'm using when I play Minecraft. But yeah. So I've already actually made the sample of the pants, so let's go look at those. So here's the sample. We're looking at the front of the pants, panning down from the top to the bottom. And here is the back pocket with the embroidery, which I really like how that turned out. And here's the side pocket. You'll notice that the top pocket, the flap is sewn to it and it's not sewn over it. Like, it's not really an official like cover flap, but the side pockets do have that, which I think I'll keep, but I'm not 100% sure. And here is a little rotisserie moment for you, seeing the pants from the front to the back. And here is the embroidery and the waistband. The embroidery got a little weird, especially on the sword. I'm not sure what happened there, but hopefully it doesn't happen on the actual one. And here's another microwave action for you guys of how the pants look on me. And then I also had second thoughts. I think I'm going to turn these into shorts instead because it would look more like a Minecraft block. Like the proportions would look more like a Minecraft block. I don't know. So let's do a little fabric haul of everything that I'm going to be using for this project. I did end up ordering a bunch of fabric off of Spoonflower. Spoonflower is a website which you can upload a design to, like a repeated pattern, and they'll digitally print it for you. So I went into Adobe Illustrator and I basically remade the Minecraft dirt texture and the Minecraft grass texture, and Spoonflower printed it out for me, and so here is what I got. First we have this grass texture, which is going to be used for the belt and all the grass trim going on. And then for the body of the pants, we have the dirt texture. Oh my god, seeing this makes me so excited. And then for the pockets, we are going to be using just regular gray cotton. Because when you dig down in Minecraft, you like go through the first 4 layers of dirt and you hit that stone. That's kind of what I wanted to do with the pockets. Especially since there's like there's like gray little particles in the dirt texture anyway. And then I have thread, of course, and I also got a little brown zipper for the fly. So to get things started, I first am going to iron out all of my fabric just so that it's nice and flat when I'm cutting it and there's not going to be any issues with the shape of the pattern. And then I'm going to cut out all my pattern pieces. just so that I have them ready, and then I like to sew everything together, and yeah. So now that I've finished cutting out most of my pattern pieces, I'm going to bring them to the serger so that the fabric will stay away from fraying. So while I'm serging these pattern pieces, I'm only going to be serging the parts that are left open on the inside of the garment, and the parts that are sort of sewn into other pieces or are enclosed, like the hem, they're going to be left unserged just to prevent it from being too bulky, and so it's more comfortable. Okay, so now that all of this is serged up, my next step is to embroider all the little motifs onto the pants. So now I have to mark where all the embroidery is gonna be on the little pants, and then I'm just gonna run it over. These pattern pieces are all marked up for the embroidery, so now I just have to take this hoop and I'm going to line it up in the right spot. That part can be a little annoying because the hoop can be finicky and sometimes you just don't get it exactly right and you have to keep retrying. So it takes a lot of patience, but it'll be worth it. Okay, so I have the hoop all set in the embroidery machine, and we're going to do the first design. The first design is the iron sword. So this design has 5 different colors. So we're using white, light gray, dark gray, light brown, and dark brown. For these designs, I just kind of put them into Illustrator and I replicated the item textures that were in Minecraft, and I just remade them and turned them into embroidery files. So I had to clean up some colors just to keep it minimal and light, but yeah. So I essentially just repeated the process of changing the threads, snipping the threads, and then changing the hoop, and then changing the design. And I went through all 5 different designs, and the fabric did warp a little, and there's some puckering, but I simply pretend I do not see it. So the embroidery is all finished, so now we can start sewing. So for the sewing part of this project, I'm going to be using these 3 different thread colors. So first we're going to be using this brown thread for the body and where the seams are all over the garment. And then for the top stitching, I'm going to be using this tan light brown color because I am a big fan of contrasting thread colors, so I thought it would be like a nice little touch. And then for the pocket bags on the inside of the shorts, we're going to be using this light silvery gray color, which is also again to match like the stone color that we got going on. So my first line of business to start sewing is to begin work on the pocket bags that are going to be on the front of the shorts. So then once I sew this, I can start sewing the body. I got right into work into sewing the item bag, which I top stitched, and then I top stitched that onto the pocket facing, which then got top stitched onto the pocket bag. And here it all is together sewn up, and you'll see the right pocket has the item bag while the left one doesn't. And then my next line of action was to sew the other set of pocket bags to the top of the shorts. So I sewed them, pressed them flat open, and then folded them onto the back side, which I then pressed flat again, and then I top stitched it on the edge and 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I then sewed the pocket bags together, and then the top pockets were all done. And here's how they looked after that. So I finally finished sewing up the pocket bags together. And while I was doing that, I realized I wanted to put rivets in, but I don't have access to putting rivets into my garments. Like, I don't have any of the tools or anything, so I decided to instead use what I got, and I used my embroidery machine again, and I made these cute little creeper faces that have like the functionality of a rivet, but are a little more like slight little Minecraft detail. I also did a little contrasty thing where the lighter pebbles were, I put a darker creeper face, and where the darker pebbles were, I put a lighter creeper face. So also on the back of the shorts, I initially was going to have one pocket bag and one welt pocket, but because I don't feel like doing a welt pocket, I'm just gonna put another pocket bag on the other side. And instead of doing a grass block pocket, I'm gonna do like a dirt block pocket. So it's gonna be a little more subtle and not as noticeable, but I think it will still be nice and cute. So I now have one back pocket sewn, which is the dirt block pocket. But to do the grass block pocket on the back, we have to sidestep a little bit and I have to do a different step. So now I'm going to work on the grass block trim, which is going to be on the top of the pants and for the pocket flaps. Now, this is going to be a little complicated. So I'm going to be replicating the trim on the grass block. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to sew perfectly around these squares to make sure it's nice and clean. And in order to save fabric, and also because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I got this plain green fabric just so I could have a little bit of more sanity in case the lines wouldn't match up. So I'm gonna do that now. So for this part, I am taking account that there's 4 vertical levels of the grass pixels. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to be counting all these pixels. So we have 4 inches of pixels here. So once I measure out the seam allowance and mark it, I'm going to trace out the pattern on my iPad here. And then I will sew that to the green underside, and hopefully it all goes well. So to start, I got my little reference of the grass block and I flipped it over just to make sure that I was tracing it correctly since I was tracing on the back. And I measured out the 4 pixels and I added ½ an inch on each end for my seam allowance. And then I cut out the strips. And I ended up cutting out 2 strips, one for the waistband and the other for the pocket bags. And then I got the strips, I flipped them over, and I tried to trace the lines on the grass pixels, but I literally could not see a single thing I was doing. So then I realized that I had a window literally right next to me that I could use the light to see under from, so I traced on my window instead. And here is the traced outline of the grass trim. This is essentially going to be my sew line when I run it through the sewing machine. And so I used this again as a template to cut out the backing, and then I pinned it all up together. And then I ran this little guy through the sewing machine, being extra careful to follow the sew line. I just basically pivoted every time there was a corner and had to be very careful to make sure I stayed on the line. And then I cut about 1/8 of an inch from the sew line, and whenever there was a concave corner, I snipped to the point, and whenever it was convex, I just snipped off the corner. And then I pushed out all of the little squares, and they didn't really come out as clean, sharp squares. They were kind of rounded, but I did my best. And then I ironed it all flat to make it nice and clean, and here's how it looked after it was ironed. And then I took it to the sewing machine and I did a little edge stitch along the edge of the grass. And here's how it looked after I edge stitched it. I don't know if you can tell, but it's a little bit cleaner. And then I took the trim and I cut it down to fit the back pocket.
And then I took the two tops together and I matched it up wrong side to right side so that when I sewed it together, the trim would face the right way when I flipped it. And then once I sewed the trim to the top, I then sewed 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the pocket bag. And then once that was done, I then pinned the pocket in place and I sewed on the edge directly to the back of the shorts. Of course, leaving the top of the pocket open so that it would be usable. And here's how the pocket looks on the back.
So now that the back pockets are sewn into the back, we're now going to sew up the side seams, and I am going to do a flat felled seam, and then once I sew that together, I will be doing the side pockets.
So to sew up the side seam, I'm going to be sewing wrong side to wrong side because of the flat felled seam, and I'm sewing 3/4 of an inch away from the edge. And I'm pressing down the seam here, and then I'm cutting off what I don't need so that it's not too bulky when I sew it flat right here. And here's how it came out. I fear I gave myself a little too much curve in the patterning, which is why it looks kind of funky, but...
So now that we have our side seams sewn up, I'm now going to sew up the side pocket bags. So to do this, I'm going to do some edge stitches around the pockets, and then I'm going to sew them to the side of the pants, or the shorts. And then I'm going to do the flappy flaps on the top.
So to sew in the flappy flaps on the top, I am sewing in about 1/2 inch away from the top of the pocket bag into the flap. And then I fold down the flap and I iron it and I press it flat to keep it clean. And I like to tuck in the seam allowance so that when I sew it down, it'll be kind of hidden into the flap. And then here I am just folding down the flap and stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the edge.
Okay, so I'm now finished sewing up the side seams and the pocket bags. Admittedly, it's looking a little messy. It may not be my finest work, but it's on there, and I'm only human, and it's fine. Anyway, so next, what I'm going to do is the zipper and the fly, and then once I do that, I'm going to do the back seam, and then I'm going to do the little leggies, and then I'm going to do the waistband, and then the hem, and then these bad boys should be finished. So let's get rocking.
So the fly is a little complicated, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about each step, but I essentially just sewed in the zipper and then top stitched it in place. And then I went over the fly guard and I top stitched down, and I wanted to make it like a square to keep with the little square motifs because Minecraft, yeah, and then here I'm doing the center back seam. And then once that was sewn, I pressed it flat and top stitched along the edge for some decoration and also to keep the seam a little more sturdy.
Alright, so I finally finished sewing up the body of the shorts, so here they are. I tried on the shorts to see how they fit, and they ended up being a little too big on me. So I thought about putting pleats in the front of the shorts, but I didn't like how that would look with the pixels. So my only other option was to take it in from the back seam. So I ended up doing that, and I had to take it in about 1 inch. Yeah, so the body's all sewn up, so now we can start on the waistband.
So here I am pinning the trim into the top of the waistband, which took a hot minute. And then I sewed the trim into the top at 1/4 of an inch just to keep it secure and in place for when I sewed it into the other waistband. And then I grabbed some heat fusible interfacing for where the buttonhole was going to be. And once that was all finished up, I began to pin the waistband to the other waistband and I sewed them together at the top. And I left the bottom open for the next step. So here I am ironing flat the trim that comes from the waistband, and it is just so satisfying to see it pressed flat. Look at that. And once it was nice and ironed out, I went ahead and started to pin the waistband to the top of the pants. So I actually was silly and forgot to record, so here I'm just showing that little sew line, and then I flipped the waistband so that we're sewing it on the front, and I'm sewing about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and so that we're securing on the inside. And then I top stitched about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge for a nice clean finish and also to secure the trim. And once that was all set, I cut out some rectangles out of the dirt fabric to create some 1/2 inch belt loops by folding the fabric about 4 times into itself. And then I sewed the fold on the edge, and I flipped it and sewed it again on the other edge. And once I was all set, I had about 6 3-inch belt loops. And then I took them to the shorts to match them up to see where they would lay. So I put them in the front, on the side seam, and a little close to the center back. And then I did 2 little bar tacks at the top to secure it, and then I folded it down and did 2 more bar tacks at the bottom. So once the belt loops were done, I did the hem, so I sewed 1/2 an inch from the edge, and then I sewed it on the edge to match the side seam. And initially I wanted to find a gray square button, but I couldn't, so I got this one. So after measuring the button, I marked down where the buttonhole would be and where the button was going to go. And then I brought it to my machine and ran a buttonhole through it. And for some reason, my machine decided to stop like a little too early, so that was a little frustrating. You can see the stitching on the left. But it's fine. The button still fits, that's all that matters. And then I grabbed the button and I hand sewed it into place. And just like that, the button was done.
Okay, you guys, I finally did all the steps and finished all the things. So here are the shorts. I am so excited with how these turned out. So now I'm going to put these on and I'll show you how they look on. Alright you guys, that is going to be all for today's video. I had so much fun making these shorts, and I hope you guys like them just as much as I do. If you like this and want to see more of me, you can follow my other socials. You can follow me on Instagram, you can see some pictures of my other projects. I'm also streaming on Twitch, and you can come chat with me while I sew and game. And you can also follow my TikTok, where I post God knows what. And fine, you can hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you guys liked it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!